You are tuned in to a Fireside chat with Zany Mystic. Join us now on another exciting metaphysical journey. Relax, tune in, drop out, and take a seat by the fire as we explore new realms and possibilities. This is Magenta Pixie. You can find me at magentapixie.weebly.com. But now, here is Zany Mystic and guest. Enjoy the show.
Greetings, and welcome to a Fireside Chat with Zany Mystic. I'm your host, Lance White. Tonight, my guest is Dr. Lani Leary. Dr. Leary specializes in work with chronically ill, dying, and bereaved clients. She has worked for the past 25 years as a psychotherapist in private practice, as a chaplain in the intensive care unit of a hospital, and as a counselor in 6 hospices across the country. She served as a director of mental health services at an AIDS clinic, as a professor of death studies at George Mason University, and as a researcher at the National Cancer Institute of NIH. She is the author of Healing Hands, an international best-selling audio tape about therapeutic touch and complementary approaches to pain management. She is certified in grief therapy, EMDR, hypnotherapy, and critical incident stress management. Her new book, which is just out, No One Has to Die Alone, Preparing for a Meaningful Death, can be found at www.LaniLeary.com. We'll be talking about it on tonight's show, so let's welcome Lani now. Hi, Lani, how are you?
Thanks for having me, Lance.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. I just wanted to say that I love your book.
Thank you.
In fact, it seems that everybody around me now needs to read it. So I bought a copy for a friend of mine who's still grieving her mother after 5 years, and she hasn't dealt with her father, who's still alive. So I ordered it, and it's on its way.
Great.
And then another friend called tonight. He's going to stop by and say hello tomorrow. And he just moved his 80-year-old mother from the desert, where she's been for decades, to Irvine to be closer to family. So he asked if he could borrow mine.
Yeah. Well, we're all part of that sandwich generation, you know, and if we're not taking care of children, we're taking care of older loved ones. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I was wondering if you would like to begin by sharing a bit of your own experiences with the loss of your mother and how you learned to cope with your father's passage, because that's kind of what catapulted you into this whole field in the first place.
Yes, it is. When I was 13 years old, my mother died suddenly and unexpectedly, and in my family, we did not talk about her illness, so I didn't have the vocabulary or the role models when I was young to know what was coming or how to prepare, and no one spoke about it even after her death. So in the absence of real information and concrete role models, I filled in those gaps with my own fantasies. And it was, my fantasies about why and how my mother died were really much worse than what actually happened. Yeah. And it wasn't until 20 years later that my father told me that, in fact, my mother had not died alone, as I thought that she had, as I had visualized. And I came to understand that her death wasn't my fault. But for so many children who do not have information, we make it about us because it's the only sense of control that we have. So after she died, I had to make sense of it, and I had to gain some sense of control over it. So I remember saying to myself that her death, my mother's death, was going to mean something. There was going to be some value in it. And that's how I coped through that, and I started writing at a very young age. And then later, I took myself to school and learned everything that I could about the dying process and about grief, so that never, ever again would I feel unprepared or unable to help another loved one die, or to be with them and there for them. And sure enough, let's see, how many years later, 40 some odd years later, my father did call a few years ago and to tell me that he had end-stage lung cancer. And so I felt absolutely prepared for this, and in fact, really, this was an opportunity. This was an opportunity for me to do for my father what I was not able to do for my mother. Mm-hmm. And so I did fly home, and I closed my private practice, and I closed my university classes that I was teaching, and I came home to be with my father and to really be his advocate and mm-hmm. his mouthpiece, and to do his death for him so that it followed his values. And my premise was that he got to do it his way, that it was his life and it was going to be his death. And so I cared for him. I listened to all of his stories. I helped him to sum up his life, and we wrote his obituary together. We reviewed his life through all of his scrapbooks and stories. I asked him very direct questions about what he wanted and what he did not want as he died, mm-hmm. so that I could support his choices. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, in the end, he decided to take out the oxygen tube, and I reminded him that if he took the oxygen tube out, he would die soon, and he said no more. He didn't want to live on anymore, mm-hmm. and I was there to support him, and so I just held him in my arms as his breath got shallower and shallower, and he let go the way he wanted to. Mm. And my grief with my father, Lance, mm-hmm. was so different than my grief over my mother's death, because at the end of my father's life, I knew that I had fully participated with all of me, and there wasn't anything more that I could have done for him, and I knew that he knew that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so it was really my father allowing me to be there for him was his last gift to me, and the way that I cared for him was my last gift to him.
Wow. Well, that's, I read that story, and it was just deeply moving. I just loved that story, and you start out the book with that story, and it's, I thought, my friend's got to read this, because she's still grieving her mother after 5 years, as I said, and mm-hmm. father hasn't gone yet. So, mm-hmm. I feel like I may not be able to coach them personally, but I can certainly give them the tools and say, here, read this.
Well, there are some tools, and there are also some really good questions. So, yeah. The truth is that grief does go on for a lifetime, because if we have loved someone, we will miss them. Yeah. But the meaning that we attribute to their death really makes an impact on the intensity and the duration of our grief. Uh-huh. So your friend who continues to grieve the death of her mother, if she could find some meaning in it, in other words, did her mother's death give her something? Did it help her to grow in a way? Uh-huh. And what does she believe? What does she believe about death? And what does her mother's death mean to her about herself? Mm-hmm. That's an important question. Yes, mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I found with all the people that I've lost over the years, one of them was a close friend who died of AIDS in my arms. Mm-hmm. And I found that what is left as time passes is the love. And all of anything that I brought to it that was personal or selfish or, that was not a part of the love part of it, mm-hmm. that just kind of dissolves with time. Right. And it's so much easier if you just start out that way.
That's a beautiful example, Lance, because if we can focus on the love instead of the loss.
Yes.
You can imagine that your loved one is saying to you, don't remember the last moment of my life. Remember the rest of my life and all the joy. Mm-hmm. But don't remember me by my death. Mm-hmm. Remember me by my life. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When you are, you've been with so many people that have crossed over, mm-hmm. and a lot of people are now starting to talk about the near-death experience, and we have so much denial and mystery around what happens after death, fear and denial.
Yeah.
What you've had a near-death experience, and I've had one. What is? Why are we in such deep denial, and what's the truth about all this, from your perspective?
Yeah, we're in deep denial because we're such a scientifically driven society, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when over 25 million people who have reported the near-death experience just in the United States come back with the same description and a similar experience, we have to begin to bring it into the light. And my analogy would be that, 150 years ago, when the parrot had not been discovered and no one believed that it was on the map, if person after person after person, if 25 million people went to this land that was never on our map and came back with the same description of the beauty of the land and the beauty of the people and the feeling of love and peace there, we would have to put Tahiti on the map. Mm-hmm. And that's what these millions of people in over 25 million people in the United States, but this is a worldwide experience, and people from different cultures, different religions, different age groups, different experiences all come back with the same experience, and the experience has taught us, those of us that have come back, do not fear death because so many of the myths are shattered. The myth that death is the end of consciousness, you and I know is not true.
Right.
Yes, and right. or the myth that death is the end of a relationship, we know not to be true. When I had my near-death experience, my mother was right there with open arms to catch me, and in that experience, we were able to communicate telepathically, and I knew that she knew all of the details of my life that I had wanted to share with her after her death. I didn't need to give her the minutia. What was most important was that I knew that she had always been connected to me, and I still know that today. Mm-hmm. Another myth that the near-death experience shatters is that death is painful. And we know that in that moment of death, there is actually great healing. And people on the other side, those who are blind in this plane, are able to see. Those who, my mother did not. My mother died broken, and when I encountered her on the other side, she was healed and beautiful and vibrant. So death is a healing. It's not the end. Right. Yeah. Right. And the near-death experience is not, important in and of itself. I think what's important is how we are transformed because of that experience. Uh-huh. And all of the people that I've spoken with who have shared this experience come back with a heightened spirituality and a sense of inclusiveness of all people, and almost an ability to see the God in all things, and no fear of death, and a real need to contribute. Yeah. Yeah.
I've heard and read that there are new abilities that expand to continue after one returns, and most people don't really want to come back. So, it's beyond description, so you can't do it any justice. So it seems that if we knew that on a personal level or knew it anecdotally as a species, if we shared stories like they used to do in the old days, we would know this, and we would be celebrating and honoring, and the whole thing would be different. There'd be a whole different experience of joyousness, it would seem.
Right. Right. And I think one of the reasons why I was called in as a chaplain to the intensive care unit in a hospital is because a lot of nurses were reporting that they had patients who had died and were resuscitated and brought back, and they did not know how to respond to these patients and to their reactions.
Oh.
And so I was able to listen to them and to validate their experience so that they didn't feel crazy.
Right.
Yeah, they did know that this was in the norm, and that a sense of, like you said, it's difficult to come back. That too was normal. But if we begin to hear these stories and really take them in, then we're also able to minister to the dying in a different way, so that at the very end, it's so common. I've been at the bedside of over 500 people at the moment of their death, and I've been with thousands of people in the process. But those people at the end who want badly to share their vision of a loved one who had died before them, so often their deceased loved ones come back, and in that last moment, they're coming for comfort. And if we can hear the dying person's vision, it gives them great comfort instead of saying, "Oh, no, that's just the anesthesia," or they're just there's some dementia or something like that. We take away a moment of comfort and communion with loved ones, and we need to be able to hear the whole spectrum of experiences. Yeah. It's all such a mystery, and it's a beautiful mystery. You know?
Yes, and isn't it interesting that most of the people come back with a sense of purpose?
Absolutely.
There's often a sense of meaning and kind of like a plan or a mission that could be fulfilled if you return. And being given the option to stay and go on or to go back, some people are just said, no, you can't go back. I actually was with somebody who almost crossed over, and he came back, and he said he was gently put back in his body. He was at the end of a silver cord, and it was so awesome that he wanted to break the cord and just keep going, and he was lovingly put back and said, no, it's not your time yet. And it gently put back, and then all the connection points that are the thousands of points that are done with Chinese medicine, they were all had to be reattached. He was that far out. It's really interesting stuff. But have you had any experiences that might be considered on the metaphysical side with people once they have crossed over?
Oh, I've been visited. I've been visited by a number of people, and in fact, on the 1-year anniversary of my father's death, excuse me, your body registers, grief anniversaries. And of course I did know that it was the anniversary of his death, but I just wanted to share the love with others that had loved him as much as I did, and my brothers are not as verbal or comfortable with their feelings, and so that didn't happen for me to share that anniversary date. And I remember standing in my kitchen saying out loud, "Oh, Dad, I just feel so alone." And the minute I said that, from down in the basement, blasted on the CD of the music, the one piece of music that I was singing to him as he died in my arms.
Wow.
And that piece of music was in the middle of a CD, and the CD player had not been on before.
Wow.
So,
Love it.
Then I just kind of stopped and paused and said, of course I'm not alone. Lonnie, remember what you know. You're never alone.
Oh, yeah.
But I've had many experiences with hospice patients who die in the middle of the night, but come and wake me up at the moment or right before they die, and then I get a call from their spouse saying, Lani, can you come right over? I think so and so has died, and they visited me to say goodbye before then. So all of those things don't surprise me. I just feel grateful.
Oh, yes, that's wonderful. A lot, and many people listening and people who haven't heard this have had that experience. I don't know how many countless nurses I've talked to who have said the same thing.
Right,
You know.
and we need to normalize it. There's nothing woo-woo about this.
No.
If we start to talk about it, other people come out and validate it, and it's just so comforting. We are not alone. This is not the end. Our love and our relationships continue. We need to know that.
Yes, and, I've begun to look at birth and death as part of the continuum, that there is no such thing as birth and there is no such thing as death.
Mm-hmm.
That, the soul or the essence of spirit is that continuous oneness, and this just appears to be a certain thing, but it's just a small part of the larger picture that of which we compose, a great symphony. And sometimes, this is a question for you, it seems that the grief, if it's too severe, and I have grieved so badly that it was like, a haunted house, a fox howling or something, because I didn't believe that the soul went on, that the person just ended and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
But is it true that the grief that we have puts up a barrier between communication with the deceased one who's kind of hovering or in the vicinity before they transition?
I think it is hard for a soul to get through that thick blanket of grief.
Mm-hmm.
And this is grief is about ourselves.
Yes.
Grief is about our sense of aloneness.
Yeah.
I don't think we grieve as much for the person who goes on,
right,
as it is for those of us who are left behind.
Uh-huh.
And we can change that.
Uh-huh.
You see, even your story about you lost a loved one and you grieved so severely, but it wasn't the death as much as your story about the death that caused your suffering.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So if a loved one dies and we keep them with us, and there are ways to keep them with us in loving, not unselfish ways, but for instance, even though my father is dead, I continue to daughter him. So in other words, I think of daughter not as a noun but as a verb.
Yeah.
And so I continue to stay in relationship with my father by doing things to honor the relationship.
Yeah.
So I would have his friends over for dinner, or I would participate in organizations that he cared about to carry on his legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those ways keep the relationship alive.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Absolutely.
every time we bring to mind our loved one, don't we change our state? We feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have more power to maintain the relationship than I think we use.
Yes. One thing that helped me with my mother and father's death, because I was estranged from my mother, and she died of alcoholism, and I was unable to be with her, and my father I was with at the end, but he was angry and Alzheimer's and the rest of it, and he just, said some very nasty things. So I turned the other cheek and walked out, and he died, and then I went back in. But one of the things that I have learned is a good trick, that it's not really a trick, it's the truth, is to try to remember them not as they were when they passed, not as they were when you were children, if there was abusiveness or any kind of unpleasantness or memories that you don't like, but to remember that that was all part of the script, and that in reality, their true nature is a glowing ball of colored light, and it can shape a beautiful image of radiance and youth, and be like you remembered them, and even better. So if you're going to remember them, remember that image, because that's what the image is that they bring back from the other side.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Oh, thanks.
And even that we don't even have to forgive someone if we never begin to blame them.
Yeah, right. Well, you're a good one.
Yes,
very good.
So,
and the guilt,
and really, I think one of the things that I gained from the near-death experience was just the wisdom to know that all of us are really doing the best job that we can, even when we're making horrible mistakes, because in that moment, we are using the resources or the energy or the awareness or the experience that we have, and we all are working with challenges and limitations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other thing, too, that's coming to mind is that when the loved one appears to be less than loving, we're kind of waiting for them to generate it. But if we generate the love, knowing that underneath that, those layers of illusion, it's only love, then it can trigger that communication, and you can speak to that person at that level, at the higher self level, at the soul level.
Yes. Yes.
And that can evoke the love, and that at least helps us on this side, to deal with it.
Yeah, usually when I'm working with someone who's dying and that less than noble part of them comes out, I often just work with that as fear. And when I do that, it's so understandable, isn't it?
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. And then we can have compassion.
Yes.
Because it's not them, it's just their fear.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that brings up another bullet point, that it's so helpful to deal with your fears when you're alive.
Oh my gosh, yep.
And that, as we go, as our fears come up, that if we process them and release them continuously, as we're able to do that, and by the time we do reach that moment that we choose to transition on to the next levels, then there isn't that fear. There's going to be something. There might be some little apprehension, but deep down inside, if we have done our research on our own life and released all that, we know we're going to a much more wonderful place that we're going to be just delighted to be in.
Yeah. I want to face the fears. I want to lean into them.
Yeah.
And I think that now we can do the work of even confronting our own fears about death. And when I was teaching in the University Death and Dying course, the big project was to be able to identify your greatest fear about death, and then develop a project so you did lean into it and face it. So, for example, one woman's greatest fear was that she was an only child, and she knew that it would be up to her to write her father's eulogy and obituary. But he wasn't sick yet, and she didn't know how she was going to do that. So we developed a project so that she had to go to him and ask him the direct questions about his life in relation to his death, and how would she write the obituary. So sure enough, she did that with him, and it didn't surprise me in the least that a year after the course was finished, I got a note from her saying that she was so grateful that she had faced her fear about that, because sure enough, her father had died unexpectedly, and she was fully prepared. But not only that, she knew more and appreciated more about her father than she ever would have had she not faced that fear.
Yes, well, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Wow. But we can lean into this and really raise our death competency just by doing simple things like writing a will, visiting a friend in the hospital, going to a funeral, touching a person who is ill, listening to someone's grief. All of those things help us to push through the fear of death of a loved one or our own death, so that we are able, in the end, to be present. And that is the greatest gift that we can give someone who's dying.
Yeah. What are the 5 lasting breaths? That pertains to this, doesn't it?
The 5 lasting breaths, yes. Often, the dying, one of the reasons I wrote the book is because so many people that I've been with taught me so much about the dying process and what they needed. And if I could leave listeners with 3 concrete things that they could do for someone who is dying, it would be, the first thing that the dying have taught me is that what they need that they don't get is for people to listen to them, not to tell them how they should die or should feel or should respond.
Yeah.
But the dying need us to listen to their stories, because more than anything else, the dying are not afraid of their imminent death or even physical pain. They are afraid of feeling emotionally abandoned. And if we listen to them, then we join with them. So the the real presence of just listening, and I mean listening to that same story over and over and over again, even if you have to hear it 100 times. That story is important to the dying person because it's helping them to put their life into perspective and to understand it. So the first thing would be for all of us to learn how to listen more deeply and profoundly. And the second thing that the dying tell me that they need, that they don't get, is gentle, compassionate touch. I was with a man recently in the hospital, and I went to visit him, and I asked if I could sit with him, and I asked if I could hold his hand. And he said, "Lani, this is the first time in 3 days that I have felt the warmth of human skin. The only thing that has touched me in the last 3 days has been a stethoscope, a needle, or a gloved hand."
Oh, gee.
Yeah, and you see how inhuman that is.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and with touch, we can have, we can encourage children to participate, and they can come in and they can massage grandma's hands, or somebody else can brush her hair, somebody else can just stroke her arm, somebody can just sit and hold her hand, but touch is so humanizing.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Then the third thing that the dying have taught me is what they need is to be given permission to let go.
Yes.
Because the dying are afraid that when they die, it will be interpreted or felt as though they have abandoned their loved ones, or they have failed. They haven't fought hard enough for all of that. And so they really need to hear from their loved ones that, I'm going to be okay, Dad. If you let go whenever you need to. It's okay. It's all okay. So permission to let go is one of those last breaths that you were talking about. Usually those last 5 things that need to be said are, I love you. I forgive you. Please forgive me. Thank you. And it's okay to go.
Oh, those are wonderful. The one with I love you seems to be more for us. I mean, it is for both parties, but we know that we have once and for all said I love you, even if we have difficulty saying it. My father couldn't say that. He had difficulty with touching, and, it's a whole different generation in the Depression. So, it's a learning experience to move from the head into the heart and to actually feel things, and I think that's a good direction that we're going in. You bring up, I hope you don't mind if I quickly share the story. My friend Don passed away about 30 years ago, and he died of AIDS, and he had a partner who was a male and a pianist, and he was staying in the house at the last stages of herpes, KS, and various other things. He'd fought it for 2 years, and he'd gone to the hospital and back, and he'd bloated up like a balloon. And Seth called me from upstairs and said, "I think you should come up here. I don't think you'll be here long." And I went up, and it felt like a rehearsed play. It was so strange. Seth was on one side, I was on the other. Don's eyes were swollen shut, so he didn't seem to be there. There was he wasn't, he was not himself. And I said, Don, Seth and I are here with you now, and we love you very much. And just as I finished that statement, a little tear came out of the corner of one eye, and he gasped his last breath. And that should have been a beautiful process, and it was. It is now, but at the time, it was all about me, and the loss and all that stuff, just like we said earlier. So if I had known what you share in your book in the first half about what I wish I had known, and in the second half, what I wish I had known about grief, I would have been light years ahead of where I was. I grieved for months, breaking out in uncontrollable sobbing on the freeway and at work and inappropriate places, and it just was not. It was not a good time for me. So
it sounds like a lot of painful work, Lance, but it doesn't sound like your grief was inappropriate.
Well,
it sounds like your grief was sincere and deep.
Oh yeah.
And,
yes.
One of the things I think our culture does such a poor job in is we don't allow people to grieve for very long. We give 3 days off for bereavement leave as though, snap out of it.
Right.
And grief takes so much longer than we recognize or allow for. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And men grieve differently than women, and there are all kinds of different ways to express what is very real grief.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What are some of the differences? Is it...
Well, I usually refer to masculine grief versus feminine grief, and so I'm not talking about necessarily men grieving differently than women, though generally they do. And they're just differences. They are not deficiencies.
Right.
And that's a really important point because as a psychotherapist, I see couples in my office often, for instance, after the death of a child. And the mother is usually, these are generalizations, but usually the mother is able to put words to her feelings, and she's able to express her grief through tears. And often the couple is in my office because the woman is feeling that she is doing all of the grieving herself because she doesn't see her husband's tears, and she doesn't hear his feelings in words, okay? So our culture is much more therapized for women, and her husband is grieving and is grieving as deeply and profoundly as she is, but he's doing it in different ways because men tend to do their grief through action. So I usually encourage men to sweat their tears and women to cry their tears, and men to express their feelings very easily by building a memorial. So a father this particular father that I worked with, he rebuilt the fence where his daughter was crushed in a car accident. But he was able, you see, to rebuild his life in that way. Yes, and the mother rebuilt her life by telling stories. So she was verbal, whereas he was action-oriented. Both are absolutely normal, acceptable ways of expressing grief. But we need to acknowledge the different styles of grief, and we need to know that they're just different strategies for coping. But, my main message is that the way we express grief has very little to do with love.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right.
And we need to help families understand this.
How do we get in touch with the love when, is that one of the common themes that you see that the grief and the rest of it and the drama kind of masks something deeper that isn't really being addressed?
Well, oftentimes, the anger isn't addressed, and anger is a very real and can be a normal part of grief, especially if there have been things that have been left undone, if the relationship has not been resolved before. So anger is, and sometimes I work with men who are much more able to express anger than they are feelings of sadness. Yeah. And also, I look at people's how the body holds grief. And that's another way that we can talk in terms of grief, so that if a man comes to me and says, I've just had a stomach ache for weeks, that would probably be where he holds his grief.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so his body expresses for him maybe what words can't.
Mm-hmm.
But all of those are just ways of knowing grief.
You talk about children in the book, too, and the thought occurred to me that, because you mentioned that it's important to help your children through the process as well, and not just focus on yourself. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if it was possible that grief is largely a learned cultural behavior, and that children are modeled or are imprinted with distorted beliefs and inauthentic feelings as a result of seeing their parents weep and wail and do things that are just distorted and dramatic because of the loss. What if parents celebrated joyously? Aren't there some cultures that do that?
Yeah. Oh, there are cultures that do that, absolutely. Well, there are cultures even within our culture.
Right.
If you go to a funeral in the South with blacks, their funeral is a celebration with lots of song, and really it's about liberation. And then if you go the next day up to a funeral service up in Maine with white Protestants,
right?
It's very tight, and it's much tighter and much less joyous. So even within our culture, yes, we teach children. We don't. I wouldn't say the feelings are off, but the interpretation of loss can be skewed and less. Let me say less helpful. But all mammals with a brain stem grieve. All animals with a brain stem grieve. Now, why I say that is that dolphins grieve. Elephants return to the site of a death, and they grieve. Children who are developmentally or intellectually delayed also grieve. And that's because we are attached. Whenever we're attached to a love object, when that object is removed, we will grieve. But how we grieve is, the rituals and the expressions of that grief are taught. And some are more helpful. So, for instance, I get a lot of questions from parents about, is it appropriate, or should I take my 6-year-old to the funeral of his grandfather? A lot of that has to do with the relationship to the grandfather. But, again, if children don't see the end of life, they will make it up in their heads. And it's usually much, much worse than the real event. And children, adults and parents can prepare children in very, very helpful ways. And we can help children to participate in our rituals in a way that is meaningful for them. So a friend of mine whose husband died didn't know how her 5-year-old would participate in the funeral, and so we went to the little girl and we asked her, how would you like to say goodbye to Daddy? And she came up with the idea of drawing him a picture about how she felt about him and tying it to a helium balloon. And after the service, we all let go of these helium balloons. Well, she remembers that to this day.
Wow, that's
because
beautiful.
her experience of participating in that farewell celebration to her father was very similar to you feeling as though you how you felt when you held your friend as he died. You participated. You were there. It mattered. And even though you couldn't change the outcome, which none of us can, we all are going to die, you participated in the process. And that changes your grief. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we really do need to step up and be there for children because depending on their age, they don't understand all the sub-concepts about death and dying. They need to understand that death is universal and death is irreversible, and that there's a cause to death, and that the body doesn't function after life. And children at age 5 do not understand that in the same way that children at age 10 do. So at age 5, we need to be prepared to hear questions over and over and over again as the child comes to, kind of file and sift through all of this information. So a 5-year-old child will ask me over and over and over again, well, does Daddy wear clothes in heaven? Or does Daddy have to go to work in heaven? Where does Daddy go to the bathroom? And when is Daddy coming back? So those are all concepts that 5-year-old child has not grasped yet. But those questions inform us of where they are developmentally. And we can teach parents how to respond to these questions. Parents are, they're concerned. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to participate in any fear factors. But usually we answer a question, a direct question that a child asks. We let the child lead us. And we're always there. We always answer whatever the child asks. But we don't go beyond the child's level of understanding.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. So you don't try to explain things that are beyond his or her ability to grasp, and you don't make things up.
No, you do not. No, you don't not make things up, and you don't use euphemisms like, well, Daddy just went to sleep, or
right.
or even God took Daddy. Depending on, I've had children not want to go to sleep, depending on how death was explained to them, or excuse me, the euphemism that God takes the good ones first.
Oh, dangerous thought.
So we start teaching children that, and what do they think about themselves? So we have to be really careful about how we refer to death.
Absolutely. I guess that puts emphasis on watching what we say and meaning what we say and being truthful. With ourselves and with everybody else. Are there any truly moving experiences that you would like to share that you've had, over the years?
Oh, I've been so blessed with such extraordinary, courageous people at the end of their life that have really taught me how to live. Well, I guess one of my favorite stories is, one of my stories is of working with a woman who was dying of lung cancer. She smoked like a chimney. She was part of hospice, and she was also a very strong community advocate. And by God, she was going to go to this community meeting in her last days of her life, even if it killed her. And so we wheeled her to this community meeting against her family's wishes, but this is what the patient wanted. We wheeled her in there, and she was smoking. And I remember the director of hospice coming up and, just really, giving me a piece of her mind, saying that I should have made this patient stop smoking because she was setting a bad example. And I remember saying to the director of the hospice, she is not your poster child. She gets to die the way she wants to die. And if this gives her comfort, it is not our place to take it away from her. But again, that was the presuming that we knew who she should be or how she should die. And I always just thought that was a really important lesson. And then I'm reminded of a little girl that I worked with who was only 7 years old and had very rare ovarian cancer. She was not afraid of dying at all, and her parents were. And I remember her saying to me that the most painful part of dying was having to pretend around her parents, that she was so busy taking care of them that she really wasn't even present toward the end of her own life because she was having to put on a mask. And when she died, her arms went right straight up. Her last gesture was her arms straight up. And it was so fitting of who this little girl was without fear. And then one of my other favorite stories was working at the National Cancer Institute with children who were long-term survivors of pediatric AIDS. And we were trying to find out what were the factors that contributed to their long life. And so I got to know these children, and towards the end of their life, one would be lying in bed and kind of looking up at the ceiling and saying, Johnny, Sally, Timmy. Well, I knew Johnny and Sally and Timmy because they had been friends of this little boy's, but had died.
Oh.
And so this little boy was seeing them, and I said to the nurse, go get his parents.
Yeah.
And because I expected him to pass soon, and sure enough, he did. But I was there with him, saying, "Of course they're here. You know, they're coming to play with you." And he had no fear and just great joy at seeing his friends again. And that didn't happen just once. That's happened so many times with patients that I've been with at the very end.
Wow. Are there instances where the patients start to communicate with the other side verbally and describe what's going on, and they say, well, you know, I'm talking to my Aunt Sarah.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
What are they talking about? I mean, that experience with the child.
Was,
they had come for him.
Yeah.
And it happened. It happened with my father as I was holding him in my arms as he was dying, and he opened his eyes at the last moment and said my mother's name up in the corner of the room, and I said, "Of course she's here, Dad. You can go to her. You just let go and go to her." But I think that the permission and the encouragement is just important for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're not quite at the end of the hour yet, but I wanted to kind of let you share whatever you want to share that you think is important for all of us to hear tonight.
Well, I guess my biggest message in the book is that we are so afraid of death, and we can make a difference in how our loved one experiences their life right up to the last moment. That it's normal to be scared and to feel paralyzed, but most people want to help. They just don't know how. They don't want to do the wrong thing. But I don't want people to miss the last opportunity of their life to share love. Mm-hmm. And so if we think about it ahead of time, and if we do face our own fears, if we prepare, we can be there for our loved ones, and that will change their experience of dying, but also our experience of grief afterwards. And I don't want people to miss the life that they could have had.
Well, you know, you had a near-death experience, as we talked about earlier, and you were shown a beautiful panorama of what was possible and chose to come back. Do you ever, I know you're busy fulfilling your purpose, do you ever wonder what it's like when you transition?
Oh, I can't wait. No, and actually, Lance, the story in my book says that I tell people that I actually didn't want to come back.
Yeah.
And I didn't talk about my near-death experience for about 5 years because there was a part of me that believed that no one would understand it because I was a young mother. I had a baby, and I thought people would think that I was just a horrible mother.
Yeah.
So I was told I had to come back because I had work to do, and I trust that this is the work that I was meant to do. But oh no, you know, when it's my time, I think I'll be like that little girl that just reaches her arms up because I know who will be there for me, and I know that I will still be connected to those left here, and I fully expect that I'll be able to guide or make a difference, inspire, whisper in my daughter's ear. But when I'm done here, that'll be fine. That'll be fine. And I've prepared my loved ones. I live a life as though I'm going to die tomorrow, not in any morbid way, but I live in a way that there isn't unfinished business. My loved ones know exactly how I feel, and I've made all my death preparations. I've written them down. They know there's not going to be any second guessing. and they know to pull the plug, and that I'm fine with it. It's just a transition. It's just another birth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, I tend to look at my life in a similar way, as if I'm looking at each day back at what transpired, and am I really happy with it? Am I pleased with the day that passed? And did I listen to my inner guidance? Or was I off doing my own thing? And did I miss the subtleties of nature and the connections with the nature spirits and the trees and the wind? And
what can I learn each day?
Yeah, oh my goodness.
So even if I've missed something,
right?
Even if I've missed, it's not a failure.
Right.
I get another opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't you feel, too, that we get everything we need, that there's nothing missing?
Oh, we get everything we need.
In each moment.
Even those challenges. That's exactly what I need. Yes. Yeah.
And the bad times.
And to be able to go through life grateful. I mean, grateful for it all.
Yes.
All of it.
Yes, to not separate or cherry-pick certain things and focus on them and blow them and out of proportion, distort them, but to live in the moment, in each now, as if we're on a magic carpet ride and life is flowing around us and we're stationary. It's as if the universe is designed to support us, and everything is communicating with a vast intelligence and provides us what we need. And sometimes I'll drop something on the ground, and I'll bend over to pick it up, and I find something that leads me further, and say, I need to go over there. And it's almost like a child's game sometimes.
Yes.
It's really fun. It's like being a little kid again.
Right, and if we have that sense of adventure.
Yes, it is. My dog took me out for a walk. I didn't walk her. She walked me.
Right.
And wherever she went, I followed, and I looked to see what she was doing, and she was marking certain spots where the fox had been, and, she walked on and showed me, we go this way. And so there's a quality or an ability to be able to be teachable.
Yeah.
And, to know that there is nothing that isn't equal or able to teach us something, and not to feel superior at all times, like, that's just a dog, or that's just an animal, or that's an ant. And, all life is sacred, isn't it?
All life is sacred, absolutely. Absolutely.
And we're not alone from the moment we come in until the moment we go, even if we don't have signs that obviously inform us.
Oh, I think that there are signs around us all the time. I think that we just filter them out because we don't believe it. But if we open up to it, it's a delight.
Oh, yes. And then synchronicities start to occur more frequently. Pretty soon you're in total synchronicity where you're just in it.
Yes.
And that's that seems to feel like we're moving into another world while you're still in this one.
In flow.
In the flow.
Yeah.
Lani, we're almost at the end of the hour, and I told you it would go quickly.
Yes, you did.
But yet no time passed at all.
Thank you.
Before we go, I want to thank you for being on the show, and I want you to tell people where they can find your website and your book and so on and so forth.
Great. I write a blog on my website, which is www.drlanileary.com, and that's DRLANILEARY.com. I also write a blog for Psychology Today, and you can go on that site on the Internet and just type in my name, Lani Leary, or my column, which is called No One Has to Be Alone. And I also do a bereavement column for healingthespirit.org. So those are different websites out there that you can find me, and you can find my book, No One Has to Die Alone, at Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble, and any major bookstore.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you for coming on and sharing all this, and to share yourself. I love your book.
Thank you.
And I just can't thank you enough for the incredible work that you're doing here. It's so necessary, and you're just such a beautiful light in, that we can all look to. So I just want to thank you for that.
No, it's my honor.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, this is another Fireside Chat, and we'll say good night. Good night, Lani.
Good night and aloha.
Ah, yes. Aloha.
Her death wasn't my fault. But for so many children who do not have information, we make it about us because it's the only sense of control that we have. So after she died, I had to make sense of it, and I had to gain some sense of control over it. So I remember saying to myself that her death, my mother's death, was going to mean something. There was going to be some value in it. And that's how I coped through that, and I started writing at a very young age. And then later, I took myself to school and learned everything that I could about the dying process and about grief, so that never, ever again would I feel unprepared or unable to help another loved one die, or to be with them and there for them. And sure enough, let's see, how many years later, 40 some odd years later, my father did call a few years ago and to tell me that he had end-stage lung cancer. And so I felt absolutely prepared for this, and in fact, really, this was an opportunity. This was an opportunity for me to do for my father what I was not able to do for my mother. And so I did fly home, and I closed my private practice, and I closed my university classes that I was teaching, and I came home to be with my father and to really be his advocate and his mouthpiece, and to do his death for him so that it followed his values. And my premise was that he got to do it his way, that it was his life and it was going to be his death.
I feel like I may not be able to coach them personally, but I can certainly give them the tools and say, here, read this.
Well, there are some tools, and there are also some really good questions. So the truth is that grief does go on for a lifetime, because if we have loved someone, we will miss them.
Yeah.
But the meaning that we attribute to their death really makes an impact on the intensity and the duration of our grief. So your friend who continues to grieve the death of her mother, if she could find some meaning in it, in other words, did her mother's death give her something? Did it help her to grow in a way? And what does she believe? What does she believe about death? And what does her mother's death mean to her about herself? That's an important question.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Right. I found with all the people that I've lost over the years, one of them was a close friend who died of AIDS in my arms. And I found that what is left as time passes is the love. And all of anything that I brought to it that was personal or selfish or, that was not a part of the love part of it, that just kind of dissolves with time. Right. And it's so much easier if you just start out that way.
That's a beautiful example, Lance, because if we can focus on the love instead of the loss.
Yes.
You can imagine that your loved one is.
You are tuned in to a Fireside Chat with Zany Mystic. Join us now on another exciting metaphysical journey. Relax, tune in, drop out, and take a seat by the fire as we explore new realms and possibilities. This is Magenta Pixie. You can find me at magentapixie.weebly.com. But now, here is Zany Mystic and guest. Enjoy the show.
Greetings, and welcome to a Fireside Chat with Zany Mystic. I'm your host, Lance White. Tonight, my guest is Dr. Lani Leary. Dr. Leary specializes in work with chronically ill, dying, and bereaved clients. She has worked for the past 25 years as a psychotherapist in private practice, as a chaplain in the intensive care unit of a hospital, and as a counselor in 6 hospices across the country. She served as a director of mental health services at an AIDS clinic, as a professor of death studies at George Mason University, and as a researcher at the National Cancer Institute of NIH. She is the author of Healing Hands, an international best-selling audio tape about therapeutic touch and complementary approaches to pain management. She is certified in grief therapy, EMDR, hypnotherapy, and critical incident stress management. Her new book, which is just out, No One Has to Die Alone, Preparing for a Meaningful Death, can be found at www.LaniLeary.com. We'll be talking about it on tonight's show, so let's welcome Lani now. Hi, Lani, how are you?
Thanks for having me, Lance.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. I just wanted to say that I love your book.
And so I cared for him. I listened to all of his stories. I helped him to sum up his life, and we wrote his obituary together. We reviewed his life through all of his scrapbooks and stories. I asked him very direct questions about what he wanted and what he did not want as he died, so that I could support his choices. And sure enough, in the end, he decided to take out the oxygen tube, and I reminded him that if he took the oxygen tube out, he would die soon, and he said no more. He didn't want to live on anymore, and I was there to support him, and so I just held him in my arms as his breath got shallower and shallower, and he let go the way he wanted to. And my grief with my father, Lance, was so different than my grief over my mother's death, because at the end of my father's life, I knew that I had fully participated with all of me, and there wasn't anything more that I could have done for him, and I knew that he knew that. And so it was really my father allowing me to be there for him was his last gift to me, and the way that I cared for him was my last gift to him.
Wow. Well, that's, I read that story, and it was just deeply moving. I just loved that story, and you start out the book with that story, and it's, I thought, oh, my friend's got to read this, because she's still grieving her mother after 5 years, as I said, and her father hasn't gone yet, so...
Thank you.
In fact, it seems that everybody around me now needs to read it. So I bought a copy for a friend of mine who's still grieving her mother after 5 years, and she hasn't dealt with her father, who's still alive. So I ordered it, and it's on its way.
Great.
And then another friend called tonight. He's going to stop by and say hello tomorrow. And he just moved his 80-year-old mother from the desert, where she's been for decades, to Irvine to be closer to family. So he asked if he could borrow mine.
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
all part of that sandwich generation, and if we're not taking care of children, we're taking care of older loved ones. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I was wondering if you would like to begin by sharing a bit of your own experiences with the loss of your mother and how you learned to cope with your father's passage, because that's kind of what catapulted you into this whole field in the first place.
Yes, it is. When I was 13 years old, my mother died suddenly and unexpectedly, and in my family, we did not talk about her illness, so I didn't have the vocabulary or the role models when I was young to know what was coming or how to prepare, and no one spoke about it even after her death. So in the absence of real information and concrete role models, I filled in those gaps with my own fantasies. And it was, my fantasies about why and how my mother died were really much worse than what actually happened. And it wasn't until 20 years later that my father told me that, in fact, my mother had not died alone, as I thought that she had, as I had visualized. And I came to understand that